Hello, friends, family, and keepers of the faith, to another Del Boy blog. This one is numbered 49, so 49 we've done of these now. And to date stamp this, it's week ending the 29th of January 2023. And I'm just looking at that number now and thinking, have I really nearly done a year of these? And it seems like it's gone pretty fast. It's like this week. I thought this week went really quick, but as you know, we perceive time in different ways. It's literally or pretty much going the same speed as for everybody, but it just went by so quick. That might be possibly because on Wednesday, which was a bitterly cold day, I attempted to go back to my old office. I needed to do a few things, sort of like see if I could get a few little jobs done. And I'm still waiting for a chair, you see, so I can't work from home. But I also can't just take myself back onto work and then take myself back off for just one day. So I had to get special authorization from work to say, look, would it hurt if I went in? And we just counted it as me being off. And they agreed it would be okay. But we'd have to see if we can do that on a week by week basis by special request to the HR department. And it was a disastrous day, to be quite honest. On the Tuesday, I started my car just to make sure it was okay because I hadn't used it for a while. And I then contacted work and said the car started, so I can't see any reason why I won't be in tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it. Speak to you all soon. And got up in the morning, which was quite difficult when you consider how much time you have off of work. But I got up, had a shower, got dressed, and then thought, well, no, I can't go in early because I can't risk not knowing whether the building's alarm number had been changed, whether my key still fits. So I waited and waited, and it got to 5 to 8, and I went, do you know what? It takes half an hour to get to work. I don't care if I'm standing outside for half an hour. At least I could try my key, and if it didn't work, no harm, no foul. And the car didn't start, did it? Bloody typical. It started yesterday and it must have drained all the battery. But I also recognised as well that we had our coldest snap of frost on Wednesday for that week, and it must have just drained overnight. So I had to get the extension cable out, get the battery charger out, put it on boost charge with quick start. Left it for 5 minutes. Started the car, it started, great. Then I had to close the garage and the extension cable and disconnect the battery charger that I just did. And I drove to work with the battery charger in the back of the car, just in case. And hoped that the drive, which is a good half an hour and 13 miles, would be enough for it to keep the charge, so that I didn't have to use the battery charger. Got to work, and lo and behold, I've misjudged the traffic because the kids are back at school. So there was a run of mothers and fathers all trying to get their kids to school, and I got to the office about 9:05. So I was late. I hate being late. It's the one thing I can't stand. I'm known for getting everywhere early. And, there are very few occasions that are beyond my control, such as train times or whatever, that stop me getting to be at work, at least 20, 30 minutes early. And I generally judge it quite well. And like I say, lots of things happened that day, all time related. So I went in to finish off an important document that allows me to use a password to get in and look at information that only government officials can look at. So it's a security clearance document. I started it a couple of weeks back. I was even on it on Monday, and I was down to have a meeting at 10 o'clock that day to finish it off, because there was a few financial questions I just needed to ask before I sent it off, and logged into the account, and the whole of the security clearance had been wiped off. And when I spoke to the lady at 10 o'clock and said, I'm so sorry to say that something's gone wrong, I've put my password in and everything, and the document's gone, and she said, it's probably gone past the 30 days that you started it, and it gets everybody, she said, and sometimes we think that they do it too early. So you might actually still have been within the 30 days, and they've basically cancelled your form. We have to start again. And I went, oh no. So that was a waste, because it was one of the reasons that I went in. The other reason was to do a DSE assessment for my chair at the office. Not because I know that the chair is bad at the office, it's because you have to do it every year, and my one had lapsed. Of course, we've changed firms on who does the DSE assessment online, so I have to request a password. I requested a password, and I'm only allowed to be at work for, about 4 hours. Waited 4 hours, no password came. So the whole point of me going into work, totally wasted that day. Getting up early, all the problems, the security clearance form clearing, the request to do the DSE assessment, which you hope the password would come through in a couple of moments, never came through. I checked my spam, I checked everywhere, and went home early afternoon, another half-hour drive back, no problems. And that was the end of that Wednesday work-related. So, not a great start. But interesting one. But let's get cracking on. We do the news first. And as you know, I always keep the war fresh in everybody's minds. Remember, this is just a date stamp. I, as well, am not interested in politics or any of that sort of stuff. I may mention an opinion. Oh, and by the way, if you can hear a noise, it's next door drilling. Hopefully it won't cause too much of a problem. But the war, okay. So Putin's troops launch attacks ahead of the tank delivery that NATO is sending along. 3 killed and 2 injured as Russia pressed on with its attacks to get ahead of the game before the tanks arrive. Poland pledged an additional 60 tanks to their original estimate. Ukraine give a high request number for how to win the war. So in other words, they've already estimated how many tanks they need to win the war. But say half of this figure would help with a stalemate. That figure was 300. So they reckon that if they had 150 tanks, they'd be able to get a stalemate for a long period of time. And Poland have pledged an additional 60 tanks. So I'm hoping they get that number. I do know that that just means more conflict. But I think we want this war to end. We all do, I believe. So I'm just hoping that something happens with that. The other interesting article that I read was about oil profits. So here we are in an energy crisis, and the world moves forward in just a normal way. So of course, if you're a public limited company, you have to declare your profits, and we've just got to the point where the oil ones have to be released. 5 oil companies are set to announce their annual profit estimates for this year. The figures are expected to be 160 billion. That's $5,000 a second. And you just think to yourself, here, there's people out there that flipping a coin on whether they should eat this week or put the heating on. And here's these energy firms estimating 160 billion profit. Let alone the figures that come in. This is profit, pure profit. And $5,000 a second. It's disgusting, to be quite honest. I do know that these are offshore, and that means that the government has really very little say. And the energy crisis has come about not just because of the war, but the war has not helped, and COVID has not helped, and all of these things, external things, have not helped. But you'd think we'd be able to press these oil companies, or at least talk to them and say, for 1 year, for just 1 year, can you not just have your very basic dividend payment to your shareholders and put that money back to the public so that they can live? It's just ridiculous that we don't put more pressure on, and that's how I look at it. So we'll get to the shout-outs. Now, do remember, I always read a shout-out for anybody that leaves a comment. I can't obviously shout out unless you actually do, because I don't know that you've actually watched anything. But every single person that leaves a comment I'm very grateful for, especially the people that leave a question. And these are the ones that I made a note of through the week. They are Mark Whatever, Wee Bob Art, Robert's Retro Gaming, Martroid, Denny, Jambon, Steve's Gaming. I'm going to destroy this one. Magda Kozraziak. Sorry about that, Magda, if I've destroyed your surname there. David Retro Gaming played badly. Milfy Swinbuckle, LFC Gamer and Vlogs, and Highlander. And every single one of those people is, I consider, great friends and chums and pals and everything else that you could say, because they've took their time, even just to watch 30 seconds of my blog, but they've actually taken their time to actually leave a comment, a question, or a discussion point, which makes me feel great, because everybody should have that natural need to feel wanted, needed, or loved. And if you're by yourself, you tend to dwell on, why is it that everybody else has got more friends than me? Why have they got loved ones? Why is it that they can get a hug from their girlfriend or their boyfriend, if you know, depending on how things are? And this blog that I started was started off as a warts and all. I wanted people to, when we got to the end of the year, you could basically just look at the starting minute of each one of them, and you will see whether my appearance changes, whether my demeanor has changed. You can tell, and you can then sort of like see a pattern. You know, when something's bad, I don't care about how I look. When things are going well, I have a smile or a different type of demeanor. And that was the experiment. Does, you know, how close are you to declaring yourself in a depression state, a depressed state? And that brings me actually to Magda, to be quite honest. I mentioned there was a new name there. For whenever somebody leaves a comment, I obviously go to look to see if they do videos themselves. And if it's something that grabs my attention, I'll subscribe. This is where it's great, because I get to know more about you guys. And lo and behold, there was about 90 videos on this this channel, and it's somebody that's sort of doing the same as me, only doing it in 5-minute segments. You know, just a quick 5 minutes. Sometimes the 5 minutes is a recording driving to work. Sometimes it's doing some exercising to better your body, some challenges, you know, like a 1 month challenge to do your abs or something. Lots of little videos to, you know, about going walking, seeing nature, and a lot of discussion about depression. But it's a very positive type blog. It talks about the fact that the next day is going to be a different day. The care that she's got in regards to what she does as a job, and I believe it's she's some sort of nurse or in the care community anyway, looking after patients, because she mentions patients a lot. And it's just a very interesting blog. I did subscribe. I thought to myself, it's a different take on how I'm doing it, because mine is trying to lift my spirits, talking about retro things that have shaped me to get to where I am here. And mine is also to leave something behind for my family. So if my family, when I'm gone, if there are any family left, wanted to know what the stuff around me is worth, what made me tick, what I liked, what I disliked, they'll know more about what their uncle or whatever enjoyed in life and didn't enjoy in life. So anyway, enough about all of that. We know all of this. Just a little bit of product placement. Carby is freshly squeezed orange juice. Lovely. I didn't choke that time. So I think we'll get to the questions, won't we? So there's a very late one here, because it says here that it was brought 10 hours ago. So it's past the cut-off point, but it's actually appeared in my list here of comments I have not answered yet. So Mark says, another great video. A late question for you. Oh, he realises it's late. Were you ever jealous of computers your mates had, or games on a system that were fantastic but crap not available on the system that you had? Quite an easy answer to that one, Mark. I had quite a few friends, but as you got later on in life and you were able to buy your own stuff, we tended to be in groups that had the same equipment. That changed a little bit with PCs. Let me sort of like give a more definitive answer to this. I was very jealous when money was not in my control. So I've mentioned before that the neighbour down the road who became a friend of mine, his father bought the first Atari 2600 I'd ever seen. It was 1977, 78. I only had Pong at the time, so of course there's a jealousy there, but there's also a fun of, oh, can we go in and play a game today? You're in your single digit numbers for age, so it was always, can you come out to play, when you knocked on the door or whatever, as you did as a child. And so there was a jealousy there, but your parents do the best they can and try and get you the things that please you, and they knew that I wanted one of those systems, and I evidently got one after a year. But as you go through life and you go on to working, I managed to get probably a lot more equipment than they had. I've explained that my sister sort of like worked in a computer store, and the broken ones were taken, or trade exchange were taken into the shop so that they could buy a new Atari system or a new Commodore system or whatever, because they were selling business as well as home systems. And so I had quite a few machines. It's where my Atari 800 came from, to be quite honest. But I worked on Oryx and all sorts of stuff. I sold those straight on after I'd fixed them. A lot of them were just cracked cases that just needed cleaning up. But the manager of the shop didn't need them. He got his discount basically just by writing the serial numbers down of the equipment that came in. So I take it they had a serial number checker of some sort. So I had equipment and had a different computer sometimes every couple of weeks. That when my friends came round, went, ooh, and then we turned it on, found we couldn't do much with it. That's a load of rubbish, isn't it? We're Space Invaders. You can imagine the conversations. I think things did change a little bit when PC gaming came around. So my Amigas were sold. I'd moved into PC gaming. Every month or so, I'd upgrade the processor, upgrade the RAM, change the graphic card. And we were starting to move away now into secondary graphic cards that offered 3D, OpenGL support, all of that sort of stuff. So we had Voodoo Graphics, you know, I'm sure we remember the 3DFX badge label. I couldn't quite afford a 3DFX and put a Power VR for the first year. But it was a great time because I used to be able to go around my friends, see the game run, borrow it, install it on my machine, see how it ran on my machine, because there'd be something that was similar, like my processor would be the same, the RAM would be the same, but the graphic card would be different, or I'd have a different sound card to theirs so they could come around and listen to see what MIDI sounded like, etc, etc, etc. So, but if something wasn't working, you just saved up, took the graphic card out, and put their graphic card in. The trouble is, if you left it too late, they move on to something else, like, oh, well, while you were changing your graphic card, I've upped my processor. And you're going, oh, shit. And it was keeping up with the Joneses a little bit. For a number of years that went on. At the same time as that was going on, I did dabble in consoles. I'm not going to say that consoles were my life, because they weren't. But I did like the nature that the PC had these real-time strategies and flight simulators and role-playing games that suited the PC better than a console. And when the console switched on, it was more the racing, the arcadey, and they were built along those lines, you know, sprite-driven, vector-driven, you know, so I had the best of both worlds. I suppose you could say I was very, very happy. I mean, it was a change moving to PC. It was an experimental time, probably the most fun for me because I'm very inquisitive. So I hope that's answered your question, Mark. Highlander, he's another one that's 18 hours ago, but I did remember seeing this one come through yesterday when I was prepping. So he's mentioned a question for me. Yes, Del. Is there a particular memory you occasionally replay in your mind from days gone past? Maybe it's a memory from a happy experience, or it could be bad. Interested to know. Cheers. I think memory is an interesting one, and I've brought it up before, Highlander, and that is that sometimes something will crop up on TV, or I'm going for a walk and I'll see something that invokes another memory, and it's strange because that memory can even alter my sense of smell. The memory will come into my head, and I swear I can smell the things that I was smelling at the time that memory happened. But it doesn't happen an awful lot. I tend to find that your questions and so forth invoke memories in me. I probably have the most sparkly brain in the time that I'm recording these blogs, and then it dulls to what I'm watching on TV and what's going on in my garden and so forth. So the next time memories come in is when is downtime, when I'm sleeping. I've had some recurring images come in, and I don't know what it is. Now, I've had some conflicts in the past with a neighbour that's right at the bottom of our garden, where we had an argument. They wished my mother dead. They stated that the fence was theirs. It's on a plot of land that's ours. In fact, we actually own a little bit more ground than than we've actually got. We could actually enforce having the fence moved further back. For some unknown reason, in my dreams, I'm in my garden and I see that there's a hole in the fence and one of the planks has been removed, and it starts that whole conflict that we had with the neighbours across the way in our back garden. Then I was doing a lot of gardening last year, being off work, and I was experimenting with how to grow things, because My father's passed away. He would have been doing all of that. And flowers that didn't die suddenly grew, and they grew overnight. And things that had died because the fence, we had a big sort of like strong winds last year. It blew our fence over. That was mentioned in one of my blogs. And the clematis that was growing up it came back to life. All weird things like that happening in my brain. There were conflicts and arguments that I'd had with people coming back and speaking to me as if nothing had happened, and I'd bring it to their attention, and in conversation and say, I don't know what you're talking about, as if it had never happened. And these are all in my dreams. I think the pattern here is it's all about conflict, death and life. I don't know what it means. There's no Fraser Crane for me to speak to anybody about it, but I'm sure there's websites I could put some of these things in and then say that's an anxiety dream or whatever. So I hope that's answered your question, really, Islander, because you invoke the memories, you guys, really, in me, or they'll happen sporadically, just out of the blue, and it'll bring back something that I'll try and keep for the blog at the end of the week. So the next question is from Denny, good old Denny. We know Denny now. He answers all the questions as well that I've answered, as if it's his blog. Devil. Salute to you, sir, but hey, my channel. Anyway. Just going to go down because it goes on for quite a while. Yeah, so he's answered the questions. He's got, thank you once again to Dan for answering my question. Absolutely fascinated by your time as an extra in the zombie film. Yeah. He's answered Milfy's question. Talking about Defender clones. He's answered LFC. Never been to a football match. He's answered Scott Brion's question on food. He loves toasted cheese crisps. So it goes on and on and on. He's watching on TV at the moment the last episode of Halo. And he's played Army of Ruin on his PC. He's played Matrix on his VIC-20. And Invincible Island on his ZX Spectrum. He's then talked about all of the blog topic. I've started to add a topic, as you know. And we finally get to the question. Question. Did you have a YTS job? If you did, was it for 1 or 2 years? Did you enjoy it? What did you do? What do you think of schemes like YTS and now called Kickstarter? Okay. So this has been actually answered, Denny, before, but it was before I think you started looking at my blog. You'd have to go back to the very early stages, because it might also be in my gaming history, because I was in a YTS the moment I left school. My parents didn't feel there was a academic reason for going to college and university. The YTS scheme had been around for a while, or the apprenticeship scheme. And they knew that you go to night school depending on what job you were doing, and they pushed for me to go on to a YTS. So I went into a YTS and I worked for a company called GKN Auto Parts. And I did a number of jobs around the office. So one of the jobs I was doing was microfiching statements and invoices. So then I was taking a photograph, therefore, of paperwork and then putting them onto film, which you used in microfiche readers, and creating the index films. So along with the tape spool, you had a viewing system that was on a glass plate. It was almost like looking through a microscope, only it came up on a screen and you moved to a grid reference, and it would tell you that this invoice was from this place, and it would tell you that it was stop place 32 on the film, and then you'd get the film out, put the film in, jog dial it to number 32, it would come up, and then you'd print press the print button and it would print the invoice and you'd take it upstairs to the person that needed it. Yeah, that was a couple of weeks of learning things there. And then, of course, I moved upstairs and learnt about how accounts were done, invoices was done, the computer department, all sorts. And then at the end of the year, you hopefully got a job. But the one thing was about it is, as I know that they took in 13 people that 1 year, and they hired 2. So 11 went straight back onto the dole, or went straight to the dole for the first time, should I say, from that YTS. It was a 1 year scheme. And I was sort of lost because I needed the money. Couldn't understand why I wasn't hired when I showed so much enthusiasm. I passed my qualifications at night school because we went to night school on a Tuesday and a Thursday. And ended up just doing crappy jobs that, because of my loyalty, I ended up staying in for far too long. So I moved, I think, within a month, stacking shelves at a Summerfield. I think I've mentioned that before. And I stayed there for far too long, about 1.5 years, 2 years. And while that's happening, you're forgetting all of the stuff that you learned about Office and computers and all of the stuff that you were excited about. So it was a very bad time. So did you have a YTS job? If you did, was it 1 or 2 years? It was 1 year. Did you enjoy it? What did you do? So I've mentioned that. What do you think of the schemes? I think anybody that actually got a job at the end probably thinks that they were a great thing. My dad always talked to me and said that he had a similar thing, but his was an apprenticeship scheme, and he thought that that was a much better system, where you applied for a job, the employee gave you the job, they then trained you up in that job, and the loyalty program of it all meant that you didn't take those things that they taught you away to another company that then wouldn't need to train you, and that you would be part of the family. And the trade-off is that it was work plus education, and because the company was investing in your education and it wasn't coming from any government funding, because that's my dad's apprenticeship, we're talking the 50s here, then there was a want for you to remain, not to take those skills away with you. Ups and downs. I've worked in an apprenticeship situation where I was a facilitator and for an apprenticeship scheme, which was government funded, and that had its upsides and its downsides. Maybe go into that one day, because I was, like I say, I was a facilitator and an assessor. So might talk about that one day. Thanks very much for that question, Denny. Always wonderful to hear from you. Get to Colin Jones. Now, we know Colin Jones. Bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. Oh my God, he's written an essay. Thank you so much, Colin. I love your stuff. It's brilliant. He gets paid on a 28-day cycle. Yes, that's because last week I was talking about how bad it was when I was working for the bank, that we got paid 2 weeks before Christmas and had to wait to the end of Christmas before you got paid again. Then we're talking about strikes. Yeah, he's retiring in 9 years and a month. Not like you're counting down the days, is it, Colin? And he goes on, and then you got Groundhog Day again. Predictable replies in 2023. Yes, because Groundhog Day is rinse and repeat a day over and over and over again. Yes, I bought it again. Where's the irony in that? As for the question, so here we go. Where do you stand on the subject of modifying the cases of classic computers? Let me think. I mean, I would like to say that I don't have a a problem with it. But I also have to look at the later computers and say, why change something that worked? But let's think about this for a minute. Everything was done on a budget, and when you use a piece of equipment, you tend to find, why isn't this here? Why haven't I got a reset button? Why is it that I don't have an audio out on my Spectrum? Why is it that I've just got one slot for me putting in interfaces that expand and then allow me to connect other things? Why wasn't it there in the first place? And from that point of view, we were modding them almost immediately, especially when you consider the Spectrum, because they brought out their Plus keyboard, which required you to take your Spectrum apart, put it into a new plastic housing, and it gave you those things that were missing for a slight cost. How do I feel about modding now? I think you'd think that there was enough cases that you don't need to do this anymore. I like it when they keep the design of what you originally remember, but add things that were desperately needed, like reset buttons, an extra joystick port, that sort of thing. So from my opinion of it, it has its good points and it has its bad points. I'm pro keeping it how it looked, but adding the things that it desperately needed to make it give you a quality of life with the product. I'm not a big fan of people taking BBC computers apart and putting them into PC cases and all of that to make them like a piece of modern art where you have a transparent case and all of that sort of stuff. But I am pro a case that's in the same mold as the original, that's manipulated to have the things that you desperately needed. How's that as an answer? I know it's quite short, Colin. I could possibly have that as a topic, and maybe I will. I think I'll bring that up as a topic in the next couple of months, because I think something that's as well-rounded as a question like that from you deserves a bigger segment to discuss what those pros and what those cons were, and possibly have some picture examples, because that's a really good, well-rounded question. So then we get to Milfy. Here we go. I've got to read it out. Now, when Milfy Comic comes through, I don't read his question until the day before the blog, and then it's whether I need to prep for it or not, because the questions that I've just read out just now, they're the first time I've read them. I've had to think about that right now. So, question for the next vlog. Here's a daft question for you to puzzle over. You are given the task of remaking, as the producer, editor or director, 3 classic films from before 1990 for the present day audience of 2023, with money not being a problem. To make the task tougher, as if it needed to be, each film has to be from a different genre and decade. Oh Christ. So which 3 do you pick? And which modern day actors do you pick to act in the main roles? As an added headache, oh thanks, yeah, because I've got a migraine. As an added headache for you, you're also given the task to come up with one change or twist in one of your picks that the original film didn't have. So what 3 films do you pick, and what clever change twist do you go with it? Now, this is where I'm saying, how long would I be here talking about this if I'd just got to this question? So this one, I knew, because it was from Milfy, would require a bit of prep, but I made sure I didn't read it until 1 o'clock yesterday afternoon. I read it quickly, and the first thing I did was I wrote down 3 films instantly, that I'd want to possibly change. What I then did was try and say what the veneer was that I was changing, and then I basically mentioned what the twist might be at the end if I needed one, and one of these does. I didn't do a very good job, to be quite honest, Milfy, but I'll read out what I came up with. Okay, one of the very first one I spent far too much on because I started to write the script virtually, writing down what was happening in the film. So the first one was 80s film Tron from Disney, which is a comedy science fiction film. I'm changing it to a sci-fi drama. So the way I fleshed it out was I started to write the stories that this person in the film notices small changes going on with the traffic lights. He gets so inquisitive why these changes will happen that he goes to traffic control department called the British Underground, or BUG for short, and they tell him that things have been happening strange here as well since the company was being taken over. And I didn't get much further than that, other than I was thinking about BUG, bug, RAM, CPU, trying to put in all these letters, because the twist at the end is it's a program running in a PC, which is different to Tron, because in Tron he knew where, apart from the startling moment where he was shot into the arcade cabinet and he ended up battling the central processing unit, he knew at a certain point he was in the game, that he'd been sapped in. This one starts off with a character in the real world finding things going on, and at the end there's the twist. He was a program all along. Not a great one, I know. But I loosened up a little bit for the next one. So on the 70s one, I chose Logan's Run. And I'm choosing the horror genre for this one. And the way that I'm changing it is that it's a childlike state. Nobody lives beyond 18. And you had to go into pods at the year of 18. And you never saw your friends again. There is a twist. It's a government-controlled program where people, to keep the population down below a certain amount of billion, children have been fed to animals to eat, and to certain humans that had mutated through the war, to control population. So sort of a Soylent Green, Logan's Run mismatch. That one. And Logan's Run changed from a sci-fi to a horror. And then for the 60s I chose 2001, and I would change that to a fly-on-the-wall documentary. It would be totally different. It would be as if we have gone into space. There would be a reporter that asked questions to the pilot, to the team that got the rocket up there, to the scientists that found the obelisk, and it would all be done as a fly-on-the-wall documentary with Steadicam, and it's really the only thing that's really talked about is the reporter's journey on what he was reporting and who he was reporting to. That's probably sacrilege to change 2001, which I consider to be pretty much a great film. Doesn't need changing. But for the sake of the question, I've changed it to a fly-on-the-wall documentary, in the same way as Spinal Tap and all of that sort of stuff. Hopefully that's given you your answer, Milfy. As you can have seen, I didn't spend too much time on it. but I did spend a little bit of time on it prep-wise. But the films that I thought of were in the first 5 minutes of reading your question. The rest was there. Now, I purposely didn't do what people would be in it, because we'd be spending and deliberating too much time. But when it comes to a fly-on-the-wall documentary, what you're doing there is basically choosing reporters of credit rather than somebody acting as a reporter. I'd want it to have that authenticated nature to it, you know, like almost like a YouTube unknown who's acting as a reporter to people like you, you know, so he'd be talking to the camera about who he'd spoken to and done interviews with, you know. So take that how you want it. So now we get to Steve's gaming. Steve, yay, up yours. Yeah. Well, we all know we love stuff. We haven't done my salute for a number of weeks. So he mentioned as well how much he loved the blog and the subject of Starsky and Hutch. He loved Starsky and Hutch. And he only had time for a quick question. Do you remember a TV series called Two in Clover? It was with Sid James and Victor Spinetti giving up their office jobs and buying a farm. Yes, I do. Now, this is one that I only discovered a couple of years ago, and it was going through Freeview channels, and I believe it was The Legend or That's TV channels, where these black and white Sid James shows were coming up that seemed to have been just before Bless This House, which is a great comedy show that I remember vividly, but this one I didn't remember too much. And I didn't see the first episode. All I saw were these two people, one of them Sid James, who I'd, you know, seen for years, living on a farm, and they had this other guy that I'd never really sort of like recognized before, seemed to try and better themselves to make something work. I think Sid James was the skeptic. Victor was always trying different things. I think there was one where they were trying to buy a cow and set up a milk bottling plant or something. It was an interesting watch. I don't remember seeing one in colour, so it was definitely black and white. And I enjoyed it. I found it a little bit clunky, but then again, that didn't take away my enjoyment of seeing a master craftsman like Sid James do what he does best. I think it probably didn't have too many women in it. That might be a sign of the times. It might be the setting. I don't remember seeing that. It almost reminded me of The Odd Couple on a farm, if my memory serves me right. That if you've ever watched The Odd Couple with Felix and Max, two totally different personalities living in the same place in New York, and one a hypochondriac as well, one a slob. I think you get the idea that they must have... It's a trope, isn't it? What I've just mentioned there, because what were happening in Two and Clover is taking somebody out of their normal, successful office life into something that they've never done before. Two different personalities, two different aspects and views of something that you might have to do in life. So I do remember it, loved it. Yes, great. I hope that's a great answer to you, Steve. Just want to mention I'm so happy that you've got your computer now. I did have a think about what to call your computer. I still think my original idea of calling it Deep Fort from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, rather than calling it HAL from 2001 or any of the others. And we had a little joke, didn't we, together, to say that, well, we thought you phoned the service desk 42 times. So 42, 1, 2, 3, 4. No, I'm not going to do that 42 times, Steve, but I'm just very happy for you. I think you're an old, intolerant git, because you've got to give things a go, Steve. let it go that you were on Windows 7, that you're moving to Windows 11. My God, man, it's just a change in operating system. It's just a learning curve. You are turning so intolerant. It's unbelievable. Still love you to bits. Till next week, Steve. Thank you so much. I hope you guys got the gist that we're all having a laugh with me and Steve, because I consider him to be a pretty close mate. We get to Robert's Retro Gaming. He says that you can start to live out your editing dreams by continuing your work making videos on YouTube. I think you've got a nice start. And yes, you have to look at sometimes at the glass is half full, Robert. And that's my intention this year, is to do something like that. Although I did state it would be my job to be an editor on a big production film, and that meant that I saw the whole of the film. I do believe that would have been after doing a couple of years training in college and then doing the big boy stuff, rather than learning myself from little 5-minute snippet nuggets on how to use Premiere and putting my ragtag stuff together. But you're quite right. They're editing in their own rights, and you're doing something and producing something and putting something out there in the same way films are. You're quite right. Thanks very much for all the rest of your comments. Fine, don't watch my Dwarf Fortress videos. Well, later on you might get a surprise. So we'll move on. I had a question and I've lost it. Stupid brain. Oh no, I've got it. Is there a PC game you keep coming back to over the years? For me, it's obvious, Minecraft and Dwarf Fortress. Yes, it is obvious. Why mention it? You know I bloody well know it. No. Is there a game? Yes, there is. Now, we were mentioning last week what games have kept you up overnight, what games have followed you through your years, and I've mixed and matched 8-bits and stuff, but there was one game that I haven't really talked an awful lot about until this week that came back to me, because I think this happens every couple of years. I want to go back to a game, and this one keeps coming back up, and it's Sins of the Solar Empire. Now, it's what they call a 4x4 real-time strategy game. What it is you're setting up a colony in space, and others are also doing the same, and you have big battles because you use diplomacy if you can. If diplomatic things don't happen, it's all-out war. You're constantly going beyond your area of space to another area to map planets, find out their minerals, increase the tech tree. And it came about because after Homeworld 2, there was nothing for me. There were snippets of other games that tried to do something similar, but not in the league that Homeworld was. Homeworld 1 was absolutely phenomenal, and Homeworld 2 scratched that itch but didn't quite come to anything for me. And it's nice to know that Homeworld 3 is this year. But for the biggest amount of time, Sins of the Solar Empire filled that itch for me. And it was just complex enough for me to stay with it, and not too complex for me to not get back into it if I left it for any long periods of time. The weird thing about it was every time I removed it from my hard drive, I kept the save games. And every time I loaded it back in, I didn't put the save games back in. I started from scratch. I find that really weird. Why do we do that? I think, Robert, you might be able to answer that in your own channel, because you've done Minecraft and you know there are worlds, and yet when you've come back you've started a new world. But I bet you any money you probably archived that world that you were on, and you probably thought to yourself, I'll go back to that one day. And yet there it is, clogging up space, doing absolutely nothing, and you don't load it back in. I'll be interested to know an answer to that one, Rob. And by the way, I did mention I'd like to see a video from you. This is for you for this week, if possible, or in the future. I'd like to see you do the Atari Museum 50 game, Yars Enhanced Edition, which is in there. I mentioned it in my Yars recharged review from a couple of weeks back, I'd like to see Yars enhanced from you. Little bit of homework for you, Rob. Bet you wish you hadn't commented now, but please keep doing that. I love your comments. Thank you. And then the last one, Wee Bob Art. Okay, Wee Bob Art. Been watching last week's blog today and now listening along to this one. Brilliant. Anyway, great blog, Del, and hope you have a great weekend ahead. Question. You mentioned film scores, as stated above. Do you have a top 3 favourite main themes with regards to movies? Oh, you bastard, Bob. And sorry, I do mean that in a very lovely way. He said he knows Alan loves Chariots of Fire, and for myself it's Jurassic Park. And you mentioned also that you like the Star Wars theme for a different reason. Thing is here is that I've got as many soundtracks as I've got films, and every single one of them has got a track on it I should think that I'll go back to and say that is what I like. But the very early ones, the very early soundtracks, and usually in around the mid area of when I was collecting, I used to go back to what they call the suites. Now, a musical suite is generally a collage of the main themes that are in a film. Sometimes those suites can be what they call the end credits. A perfect example of this, watch a film called The Burbs, right? It's got a Jerry Goldsmith score, and it starts off with the main titles, and then as each character comes on, there is a different audio cue for them. And then they enter the mansion or the house that's haunted or whatever, and the mood changes. And then right at the end, when everything is all giddy and the credits are coming up, the suite is a mix of the main theme and all of those other themes matched together to make up a suite. So yours is a very difficult one because it says films main themes, not scores. So you want the main opening credits or theme. And through my years, I've come across many that I've loved. Now, you'd think I'd like Superman, right? And I do like Superman. But I had not an argument with Rocket Bunny, who, by the way, I hope is okay. I'm hoping he comes back to the server shortly. I think it's work-related. He's been a very busy person when he's back at work after the new year. That Superman must be the most boring theme for the orchestra to play if you're a violinist or on drums or whatever. If you think about it, the section basically do the underlying bass, and that's all they do. And the others play a page or two of a theme, then there's another part to the theme, another page or two. But because the orchestra is set in a certain way so that you get a spectral recording, you can't mix and match a person that's on violins to do another violin section unless he wants it to be on the left hand or the right hand side of the orchestra. So for the majority of the orchestra, they've got one page and all it is that's it. Now, it'd be a privilege to be in the orchestra, but what I'm trying to say is, as a piece of music that the orchestra have to play, it must be. Oh, we've got to do the main theme again. That means I'm going to be playing the same 30 notes again, over and over again for 5 minutes. Brilliant. But that's the beauty of a movie score, because to be in that first original recording must have been such a high excitement. You must excuse me, I need another drink. And Superman is such a well-known and respected theme, and it's one of my favourites. I'm just thinking from the orchestra's point of view, they must dread it. Have I got 3? Very, very difficult. I don't think I could come up with 3, just 3. I mention all of the ones all the time that I absolutely love. I love the main theme to Lawrence of Arabia. I love the main theme to, well, say The Burbs. I love the main theme to Star Trek: The Motion Picture, most definitely. There are cues in Star Trek: The Original Series, especially around the episode of Mock Time, which is Spock versus Kirk, with Spock having his 7-year itch, having to go back to the stream to marry, otherwise he'll kill himself. Let's see. Flight of the Doves by Roy Budd, one you might not have heard of. Georges Delarue's Interlude, you wouldn't probably recognise that. Ennio Morricone's Once Upon a Time in the West, or even The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, or A Fistful of Dollars, or A Few Dollars More. All of those have got main themes which are very catchy, very abstract, beautiful in the extreme. Definitely you can tell you're in the desert in the westerns. There's some absolutely spot on scores. Battle Beyond the Stars, James Horner. It's a Beautiful Mind, or which the main track is called A Kaleidoscope of Dreams, I think is the main track. Absolutely gorgeous. Everybody knows the theme to Pirates of the Caribbean. I love the Odd Couple theme. The Miss Marple theme, believe it or not, by Ron Goodwin. Dominic Fontier's Invaders theme. Yeah. So many. And I could mention composer after composer after composer. Alan Silvestri, James Horner, Jerry Goldsmith, John Williams, Georges Delarue, Ron Goodwin, Roy Budd, John Barry, Somewhere in Time. There you are. Another fantastic theme. But he did Born Free. My God. Chaplin. Oh, yeah. Sorry, not going to be a good answer for you. I'll tell you what you got out of me there. A load of composers that you could look up. All of those titles, and you can nick the main theme of every single one of those films that I mentioned and main themes, and you've got yourself a compilation album for yourself to listen to. You cheeky git! I didn't realise what you were doing there, wee Bob. Thanks very much. And that's the end of the questions. If I have missed any, but I do apologise. But those are ones answered from my last blog. That's what comes up on my screen. But I will check to make sure there wasn't a mention in an earlier blog, in case somebody's answered one of those, because what I'm tending to notice is that I seem to get a flash up on my screen that says a comment's come through, and I'll read it, but then when I go on a Sunday I find it's not there, and I bet you any money it's because it's a comment from an earlier episode. So I apologise for that. So next week, if I've missed one, I will find it. You might have to prompt me though if you comment again this week. So with that out of the way, what did I watch on YouTube this week? So I watched This Week in Retro, like I always do. What Makes You Feel Old was in there. Yeah, that's been brought up by, I think they nicked that from Mainmeister and me. We talked about it and said, don't you feel old when your nephew comes in and says, what do you mean you sent your photos off in the post to get developed? What's that all about? What are you talking about? So that was quite an interesting one. Lego kits, yeah. Although I disagree a little bit. They said that they used to like putting their Lego into a big community box and trying to build the thing again, because Lego kits have turned into specific bricks to design specific things like big spaceships and that. I don't think that works with the Technics kits. The Technics kits, I used to love the Technics kits because I always wanted one. They were bloody expensive and they had all these suspensions and things like that on them. And I would not throw that into a community Lego set. But then again, if you remember rightly, back in my blogs, I said I never had Lego. We couldn't afford it. We had stickle bricks. Couldn't afford Lego. I only saw Lego when I was at primary school. And then they talked about grading a graded game that got stopped at customs and was destroyed. So this game was worth £10,000. Because it had a battery in it, they thought it was a bomb. They took it to bits to find out why it had a battery in it. And it was for the save state in this Pokemon game or something. Very interesting. The thing about that is just like what Neil was saying in the actual episode. If it was £10,000, you'd probably almost buy a ticket and hand deliver it. Yeah. I've started to watch a new YouTube channel this year called Splattercat Gaming, because I've started to understand a little bit of my Steam game playing habits are more indie related. And what he tends to do is he buys absolutely every indie game every week on Steam and plays about 40 minutes of it, right? Which stops me having to spend my money to see whether it's something that I'd like. So he looked at this week a game called New Cycle, one called The Pioneers, and one called The Caves of Lore. And instantly I fell in love with Caves of Lore. It's one that I've put on my wish list. Definitely one I'm going to go back to. It's old school role-playing game in a retro pixel art type thing. New Cycle and The Pioneers look more stylistic and more polished, but I'm pretty sure they'll be bug-ridden and probably will get to a certain point of development and stop. At least the role-playing one, you can imagine, must have done a number of hours before they put it into alpha. So I think there'll be a story there where the other one will be scavenging for metal and craft this and craft that and all of that, because you're on a lonely asteroid and you've crash landed or something, which is, I'm pretty sure, New Cycle or The Pioneers or one of those. Then I watched my good friend after New Year, Techmoan, who I've been watching for the most amount of years of all of these. He actually took apart an old Amstrad hi-fi. Now, this is something that's quite close to me because my sister had a £199 Amstrad hi-fi unit, which she loved, played to death, thought it was the bee's knees, and I thought it looked very shiny but a piece of shit. And we used to have arguments over it. So just to prove the point, Techmoan took one of these hi-fis to bits just to show you what lovely Alan Sugar was trying to sell you for £199 back in 1981 and 1982. And they were shit. It was all shiny plastic on the front. If you pulled it out of its housing, there would be about that much electronics behind it, and the rest was empty. Nothing in it at all, just chipboard, empty air. Speakers, took the speaker fronts off. You had the cone at the back. No, didn't even have any baffles to deaden the sound or to enhance the sound or anything. Crap, Alan Sugar. Brilliant. Watch it. You'll be amazed at what he was selling you and how much he was charging you. And all the others had to follow suit, otherwise they'd go out of business. So where Technics and Sony were doing their individual units and selling them at the cost of the whole thing for Amstrad, all of those had genuine parts that tried to do the things that Amstrad said that you could do with one switch, like get rid of pops and crackles from records, Dolby, noise reduction. He's only said noise reduction because he wasn't good enough to give you a license for Dolby. Yes, great. And then the last one I watched was Comic Tropes. I go back to him every couple of months, but he did an episode called The Evolution of John Romita Jr.'s Art Style. It grabbed my attention because John Romita Sr., who's one of my favourite artists for Spider-Man, it was his 93rd birthday this week. His son, John Romita Jr., which I also like his artwork for, has evolved through the years. The subject talked about how he got into the industry, how his dad shunned him, didn't try to give him a leg in, did not tout his work because he wanted his son, if he was to become an artist, to get noticed for his work, not because of his famous father. And then it talks about how his style has changed but remained the same. He's known in the industry as the Speed Man, a little bit. He's the production line of Marvel or DC, wherever he's working. And the reason for that is he takes on 2 or 3 books a month, 28 pages or 24 pages for each book, and will get it to the deadline in time. And you will see that his art style changes depending on how many books he's doing that month. So if he's doing 2, you'll tend to find the faces have a little bit more detail. If he's doing 1, then it's a huge, incredibly artistic book. If it's 3, the line art starts to become less and less. There's less shading, less line work. But he keeps it in the same style. But through the years, his style has changed, become less boxy, more rounded, etc., etc., or the other way round. Interesting, worth a watch if you're into that sort of thing. You know me, I'm a comic book lover, so brilliant. And what have my friends on YouTube been doing? So Ponder, yes, you scared me, because while I was prepping my blog, 2 alerts came up for you: a high score challenge on Flying Shark and your 100 Miglia challenge that you're doing. Watch both of them. You're doing great, mate. Thanks very much. 2 totally distinctively different games. I do like these high score challenges. Sometimes I think I might join one of these high score challenges, but you see, I don't want to be number 1 each week. I tend to find that I'd destroy you all, and it just wouldn't be fair. It'd be boring after a couple of weeks, wouldn't it? But anyway, I'm sticking to that as an answer, even though it's complete bullshit and you know it's tongue-in-cheek. Up yours, Ponder. Anyway, LFC Gamer and Vlogs, he did a blog about shopping and meeting annoying shoppers, a bit about football and nostalgia in games. And it's always nice to visit another person's blog, especially someone like LFC, because we will have contrasting opinions about things. He was talking about why keep a game if you don't play it anymore. A game is supposed to be played, and that's one particular aspect. But there are other people that go, no, I want to keep that to remind myself that I played that game. I want to show my kiddie, when I have one, this game that I used to play, whatever. There are many, many reasons why we keep things, and some of it can be hoarding, but I do agree with the fact that a game is supposed to be played, and if the game is not good anymore in your eyes, then get rid of it, because it's just taking up space. But you also have to think to yourself, am I as a rounded person going to change and not go back to it and not love it again? Just because I picked it up today, put it in, and I think it's a disgusting piece of crap, doesn't mean in 3 years' time I won't be sentimental enough to put it in and go, oh yeah, I really love that aspect of the game. Why did I not play this last year? You've got to remember that, well, we do things as part of the moment, and because we do things as part of the moment, we sometimes make a decision to destroy, and if we destroy, we can't go back. So contrasting interests on that one, something for LFC to consider. But also remember this: nobody has a right answer or a wrong answer to that. I'm mentioning it because I see both sides of the coin, and sometimes you need to step back to do that, and that's why I love your comments, because it makes me step back and go, yeah, you didn't consider that, did you, you stupid git? There you are. Mainmeister did 2 videos this week, very interesting. Some new 64 games and shoot 'em ups you need to play. I didn't really need to do the shoot 'em ups you need to play, because as soon as I saw the opening salvage of the shoot 'em up, I knew what game it was, and both Mainmeister and I are of the opinion that at the time that game came out, it was a hidden gem that should not be considered in that genre hidden gem. It should have been more well known. Everybody should have had it. Everybody should have played it, and so forth. It just remained that way, and most people didn't discover the game unless they bought a compilation, which is so sad. But I think it did well, and we got our enjoyment out of it, and it's definitely worth a watch if you really want to know what game I'm talking about. No clues, but it's one that you definitely, after watching it, need to load up in your emulator or on your proper computer and play, even if it is just for an hour, just to see what all the fuss is about. And the new 64 games are always a pleasure, although some of them, you see, I've seen in other channels where there's a roundup of new games that come out for the Commodore 64 each month that I've mentioned in my blogs before, and I would have seen those previously in there and played them probably. So then we've got 20th Century Gaming. Great. He did a stream for the first time in a while. Absolutely wonderful. And he was playing Stormlord. Really got some great feedback from my blog from Mark on there. He's saying how much he loved certain aspects of my blog this week, which was really, really appreciative. Anybody likes to get a little pat on the back sometimes. And sometimes it's great that you get a comment. Sometimes people keep quiet. I don't know. If they keep quiet, I have no idea whether I'm doing a good job or not. Robert's Retro Gaming, I watched him. I watched his Atari 8-bit stuff. I watched Pole Position and Plaque Attack on the 8-bit Ataris. And the surprising thing that I mentioned earlier, I watched a couple of episodes of Dwarf Fortress. The thing was, I got to the end of the second episode of one, and I started to want to buy it, and that's where I have to turn around and go, no, you've got to stop. You've played it before, it's now got a front end, doesn't necessarily mean you've now got the time to pick that game up. I don't think, and Robert will probably argue with me, that it's a game you can just pick up, play as little or as much as you want, and then go back to it when you can. It's got a lot more complexity and thought about it. It's a bit like my analogy of Sins of the Solar Empire. I have no doubts in my mind that I'd go back to it and it would stay installed and I would continue. The thing about it is I would lose parts and aspects of the reasons why I was building something in a certain way, or constructing something in a certain way, or sent off a team to do something because something was going to happen. I'd forget that, and when I go back, it would be forgotten and a disaster would occur or whatever. In some ways, that's the challenge in the game, but I think I put it on my wish list in Steam, first of all. And it is one that I will pick up one day. It's the wrong time for me. For me, in my life at the moment, it's the wrong time, but the right game, if you see what I mean. So, I definitely on my wish list. Definitely, I might get it as a gift one day. I might have enough money for me to buy it, but I also want to do it at a time where I've got enough time. And then Down the Rabbit Hole, lovely Down the Rabbit Hole, he did a video about his new wallet. Now, I have my own opinion about wallets. I'm glad he likes his wallet. I saw some things on there that I didn't like it looks very much like the catch might break easily. I don't like the idea of the credit cards you have to push down and slide out, and you can stack them, which means you have to slide them out to get to the ones that you want. and also there's no protection for anybody barcode scanning your cards as you go down a down escalator or an up escalator, which is how people get some fraud occurred to them, because you need to have a piece of now material between your cards so that scanners that can be held on your mobile phone where they just walk past you doesn't pick up the long pin number of your card. Had a number of people have had that happen on underground escalators, up and down escalators. If you can imagine a thief with that tool that can scan from that distance going up and up an escalator, by the time he gets to the top, 100 people probably have just passed him and he's got 100 credit card details. Very intelligent, these thieves these days. And what have I been watching outside of YouTube? So that's what I've been watching of my friends, and every single one of those was an absolute diamond in the rust. But I've been watching things on TV as well. I watched the Real Charlie Chaplin documentary on Sky this week, and I always like watching those types of old documentaries because, well, for Charlie Chaplin it's because of two films, The Kid and The Tramp and the Flower Girl. You'll need to watch the film to realise why The Real Charlie Chaplin is a good documentary. But you can look at those two films and know there's a history behind both of those. Especially The Tramp and the Flower Girl. Go look that up. I watched episode 2 of The Last of Us, and I continue to be entertained by it. The one thing that came out for me, though, at the end of episode 2 was I didn't particularly enjoy the makeup effects of the zombified humans. They looked like they had big cauliflower heads on, but it was just that the makeup looked so false. I know that if you make something too realistic, that again is too much in the one direction. But these really did look like somebody had put cauliflower over the top of a riding helmet. They acted really well as these zombies, by the way, dragging their feet, moving around. They could only hear things. They couldn't see anything because there was no eyes as they mutated. But that's my only... And it's a minor quibble, don't get me wrong. It's just a minor quibble. It's just that if you do look at it and you look yourself using Ultra HD, which is what I watched it under. I watched it as not HD, but Ultra HD. They looked plasticky. To me, anyway. And then I watched the first episode of a new Netflix show called Lockwood & Co., which is entertaining, but it's early days. So I haven't watched an awful lot of TV this week, other than the Likely Lads stopped on one of the Freeview channels, and they've replaced it with The Rise and Fall of Reginald Perrin, which I remember from my youth in the 70s, Leonard Rossiter, and I always thought of it as being a more, well, I'll tell you what it was, a sophisticated Rising Damp. So he played the same type of character, only this time he was the middle class businessman going on the train each day doing his mundane office job. Rising Damp was the slob who maintained a house with the interesting parts being the people that lived in the apartments that they rented it from. The Rise and Fall of Reginald Perrin lasted, I think, 2 seasons, because it was the Rise and Fall and then the Fall and Rise, or was it the other way around? Yes, the Rise and Fall, then the Fall and Rise. Yes, I think that's it. Anyway, dwelling too much on that. Thanks very much if you watched any of my videos. I did the blog last Sunday, which you obviously have seen, and I did Tyrion 2000, a shoot 'em up. And we get to quickly my blog, which I spent some time researching. I hope you enjoy it. This is one that has meaning for me, a most watched and beloved program that I watched in my youth. The topic this week is Randall and Hopkirk Deceased. So this was a show that was produced in 1968 and 1969. It lasted 1 season and was 26 episodes in length. It was broadcast in September 69. It was completed, its broadcast, by March 1970. In the UK, ATV in the Midlands broadcasted the pilot 2 days before the rest of the ITV network via London Weekend Television. In America, the show was broadcast as My Partner the Ghost. So what is Randall and Hopkirk Deceased? Okay, so it's a crime comedy drama from the 60s, so the late 60s, early 70s. If you can imagine what in your own country, America or here, UK, what crime dramas were around. Okay, this one was unique. So Jeff Randall and Marty Hopkirk are partners in a private detective agency in London. The business is not doing that great, but both partners are hoping to have there'd be an upturn in their fortunes. During an investigation, Marty Hopkirk is murdered by being in a hit and run, but he returns as a ghost. But only his partner Jeff can see him. Marty is sort of a beginner ghost. He realizes he's a ghost, but he doesn't understand quite how he can control his powers, and he doesn't understand really how he can help his partner, but he tries all the time through this episode. But through the whole of the episode, Jeff and Marty solve the case. But it took so long at the end for him to solve the case that he didn't return to the grave before dawn. And so, based on the curse and the agreement on how he became a ghost, he's now having to walk the earth for 100 years. This is to the detriment of a little bit for Jeff, because Marty decides that he's going to help Jeff with his detective problems, where he can be a major benefit, but he's going to be a major pain in the arse to him for the rest of Jeff's life, and that's the crux of the story. And you have to remember, when I was watching this, I was still in single digits, so this was quite gritty, but okay for me to watch. So the characters, you've got Jeff Randall. He's played by Mike Pratt. He's a semi-successful private eye, short-tempered, easily irritated, morally ambiguous, but does the right thing in the end. And he's single. Okay, and this is on the difference to Marty Hopkirk. Marty Hopkirk is played by Kenneth Cope. He's the ghost. Has a low self-esteem. He's quite analytical, cynical for definite, loyal and protective, but very, very jealous. As a ghost, he is unsure of himself or how he can remain on Earth as a ghost and finally rest. So he knows he's got to walk the Earth for 100 years, but is that going to actually happen? His powers of what he can do as a ghost are learned, and he knows that he's going to have to at some point go to rest, or he's doing it for no reason whatsoever. You have to consider all aspects of this if this was a show that was going to go on for longer than one season, as it did. Jeannie Hopkirk is the wife of Marty, played by Annette Andre, very famous actress who was in a number of shows. She was secretary to the agency. She's the widower because of Marty's death. Very resourceful, naive and vulnerable, and that's probably an aspect that women at the time were placed into for these shows. They were always the moment of peril. There's a girl in distress, the bloke comes in and saves the day aspect in all these shows that are around the late 60s and early 70s. Must be very boring for the actress. Accepting that her husband is dead, but sometimes feels his presence during dangerous events in her life. That's pretty much what her character was. She, in a documentary and interview, has always stated it was her favourite role, and she also recognises it's the role that most people remember her from, even though she was in films like A Funny Thing Happened to the Forum. She was in Cleopatra with Richard Burton, and Elizabeth Taylor. She was in a number of shows, The Champions, The Prisoner, and so forth. She was very much a jobbing actress. And then the last recurring character is Inspector Large. So that was played by Ivor Dean. He has a depressing aura about him. He's suspicious, adversarial to Randall all the time. So he always tries to pin the blame on these crimes that the private investigator of Jeff is trying to do, and tries to always pin it on Randall, on Jeff himself. You recognise that Jeff and Inspector Large don't like each other, but in the end, Jeff does the right thing, solves the case, and gives Inspector Large sometimes the credit. So, just talk a little bit about the production now. It was created by Dennis Spooner and produced by Monty Berman. Both had adjoining offices at Elstree Studios, which is where they worked day to day. And they also worked on 2 other successful shows together, The Champions and Department S. Do look those up. They are a period of the time, and each of them were well known and in the top 10 of TV things to watch in their time slot. Dennis Spooner had always had interests in the phenomenon for years, and finally put crime and ghosts together. He consulted his friend Monty Berman, who loved the concept and saw potential in the writing for it as having a never-ending amount of stories that you could have. Think about it, a private eye and then a supernatural element. They pitched their idea to Lou Grade, the head of ITC. That's Incorporated Television Company, by the way. And ITC were a powerhouse of crime family dramas at the time. Now, Lou Grade had ties with American networks, so every time an idea was pitched to him, he always tried to bend it so that it would work for the American audiences as well and didn't come across as British. It was very important to him that he got a syndicated show or some sort of show that would get more than 1 season. He didn't like the idea of Randall and Hopkirk and dismissed it at first because there was no American actor that Dennis Spooner or Monty Berman would agree on. But he rejected the pitch. However, Ralph Smart, who is a high achiever in the ITC family, who'd written episodes of Adventures of Robin Hood, The Invisible Man, and Danger Man being a very, very successful show, loved the idea of Randall and Hopkirk, went back to Lou Grade, told him that he could write for this and turn it into a very successful show for both America and Britain without the need of having an American actor or actress in it, and Lou Grade changed his mind and greenlit the project. That's how it occurred, folks. That's the history of that. A bit about the casting. So Jeff Randall, he was originally Jeff Randall, who was played by Mike Pratt. Originally was going to be played by Dave Allen. If anybody knows here, Dave Allen is a comedian that signed with the BBC, had his own sort of like talky sketch show. He signed with the BBC, so he became unavailable. Mike Pratt was a jobbing actor already working on several projects for ITC, and so he got the part just because Dave Allen couldn't do it. But Marty Hopkirk is a different story. So many actors were considered for the Ghost. None of them seemed to be correct. But a creative consultant called Cyril Franknell met Kenneth Cope at an Italian restaurant in Soho, enjoyed his company and asked him to go along for a screen test. At the screen test he did so well that they hired him on the spot to play Marty. And we all know a little bit now about Jeannie Hopkirk. She was not in the original concept for the show, but was written in to bolster the numbers of characters in the show and to add peril to some plots. Obviously, a pretty face was going to be good for the dads. Easily cast by Annette Andre, as known as a jobbing actor for ITC. She'd worked on The Saint, The Prisoner, The Baron, The Champions, etc., etc. And as I said before, she considers it the part that everybody remembers her for. Then there's a couple of cars that might be of interest. Jeff drove a white Vauxhall Victor, which was registration RXD 996F. That was also used in episodes of Department S, which was a slightly more well-known show and successful. They changed the number plate to RXD 997F. So they just changed one number, same car. Jean, she drove around in a red Mini. That red Mini was also used in The Saint, Department S, The Persuaders, and it was driven around by more stars than anything. In fact, it was Tony Curtis's car in The Persuaders while he was driving around in London whenever he was visiting London in that show. Now, one of the most enjoyable bits to me is the music of Randall and Hopkirk. It was composed by Edwin Astley. Now, when I was back in the day, not recognising what composers were, I recognised whether I liked the tune and what instruments were being used. So Edwin Astley meant nothing to me. He had his own band, the Ted Astley Orchestra, which was well known in the north of England in the 1950s and 60s. So it was a time where I wasn't even born. He was contracted to ITC, where he then became a contracting composer for TV work. He wrote music for The Champions, Adventures of Robin Hood, Danger Man, Department S, The Saint, The Baron. So a huge amount of shows that are well known in the UK and fairly well known in America. But after ITC folded and his contractual jobs diminished, he wrote scores for Hammer Films, another well-known studio. He was active for writing tunes between 1950 and the 1970s, where he then retired, and he died in 1998 to little or no recognition. Okay, this changed because Jules Holland dedicated a whole show to him in 2001, playing many tracks that he composed during his days at ITC, and a new arrangement to the main theme of Danger Man. I looked for that episode. I haven't found it yet, but I'm looking forward to finding it. The distinction of Randall and Hopkirk deceased is manifold, but one of them is the use of the harpsichord. I love the harpsichord. I think it's such a unique piano sound because it's plucked rather than hit. But the tune also was written in what they call C minor. Now, anybody who studies music, and I've done a little bit of studying and playing music, I play a little bit of piano, knows that the C minor key is sort of the Death March type of tone. So it well fitted the main theme to Randall and Hopkirk Deceased, which is all about Marty the Ghost, part of it. His work is only recognised on a number of CDs, but Randall and Hopkirk Deceased is available on free vinyl records or free CDs, and it's got over 180 cues on these CDs. I have them, and I have Randall and Hopkirk, the box set. I have it on Blu-ray, and before I had it on Blu-ray, I had a selection of DVDs. Now, the reason I mention that is it is worth picking up if you don't have ITVX, which is a streaming service which is free. So you can watch Randall and Hopkirk Deceased even today. But the nice thing about the Blu-rays is that there are some extras on there, but they were all done on film. ITC spent a fortune on their episodes, each one costing thousands. The Persuaders is recognised as costing nearly $1 million an episode because of Tony Curtis and Roger Moore. But it was on film, and if you upgrade your film to high definition, then basically, because it's film stock, you can actually get really, really good results compared to video, because video is such a low resolution medium. So this show was well received in the UK. It was dropped by ATV after 20 episodes were broadcast in the USA, and the USA had decided they didn't want any more, even though it was playing well in the time slot it was in. I believe the audience it was being sold to had already written their own show for the next year, so they used it as a filler gap, which is a shame. It was broadcast in the USA under the name My Partner the Ghost. ITC produced no more shows after no more interest was found in America. And Randall and Hopkirk was resurrected in 2000 and 2001 by the BBC, and featured Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer, two comedians who brought the show back. It has the same premise, but it's different in its tone, and there's a different depth to how Marty was killed. It lasted 2 seasons, 13 episodes, and you can get that on DVD. To me, Randall and Hopkirk is a labour of love, and one that I go back to and get a warm, fuzzy feeling about. I love the idea that the ghost is in a white suit. That any ghost that comes back has not got a sheet over their head or wearing the same clothes. Jeff is easily seen as wearing the clothes of the time in the 70s, and Marty the ghost is dressed up in a white suit with white tie, white shoes, everything white. The effects are of the time. They were really quite poor, but charming. So just to give you an instance, whenever Marty discovered that he could go through walls, you'd see him become semi-transparent and then go through the wall, so you could sort of see that it was a film overlay, a post-optical effect. But when he needed to disappear and go somewhere else in an instant, clicking his fingers or whatever, and he'd disappear. Very easy shot to do, isn't it? Film somebody there, then film them when they're not there, replace the shot, bang, you've got the disappearing scene. I could do it right now using OBS. If I was recording this under OBS, it would be very, very simple for me to do so. But the music is very haunting, fits the period, and I felt that the storylines were so different enough for me to keep me entertained for every single one. I was so disappointed to only find out that 26 episodes were made. There seemed to be a lot more. It's a little bit like Bagpuss, where you learn that there's only about 6 or 8 episodes. Or Mr. Ben, where it's famous, it's got hundreds of episodes when there's actually only 13. It's a shame. And I think it's the thing that I get from it is that Kenneth Cope was in the Carry On films. He was in Carry On Matron and Carry On at Your Convenience. And so I found him when he turned up in episodes of anything that my mind would go back to Randall and Hopkirk deceased all the time. He was in Minder. Yes, he was in Minder, a friend to Mr. Daly. So, there's lots of things that make me look back, and when I'm watching it, I'm looking back again within the show. So if you've got a nostalgia or a rose-tinted aspect to things, you'll probably find there's a lot of enjoyment. But ITC are a powerhouse. They really did a number of shows. The Prisoner is just a classic. From my point of view, get off your arse, stop what you're watching now, and go watch a few episodes. And then we come to the end. Didn't really buy too much this week, guys. Battle Beyond the Stars finally came from Italy in a steelbook. Very old classic film with a lovely James Horner score. And Mondo have now released their edition of Civil War, Marvel's Civil War. I buy these Mondos because they're individually numbered, with comic book art on them rather than the poster art from the film. And then lastly, I was going through some of my books because this turned up, a replacement Ultimate Spider-Man to the one that I had damaged all those years ago. It's taken a long time for this to be reprinted, and looking forward to reading that again. And when I was putting that away, I suddenly realised that I don't know if people used to collect trading cards, but I bought Marvel trading cards, and this is the Marvel Masterpiece Edition. And these were the 1992 Marvel Masterpiece Editions. And I was looking, and apparently this cassette, if you've got every single card plus the expanded chase cards, is now trading for over £400. And I was looking through my set, and I've got every single one of the base level cards. Just gonna get to the end. Bear with me. And I've got all the chase cards. So there's the card at the top that tells you what each individual number. Every card after that is a chase card. And I've got them all. Amazing. So, will I sell them? Nah, you know me. Not going to sell anything, am I? That will be a nice little thing that may go up in value if it's up to £400 already. I think I'll keep that now somewhere a bit safer. I think it's about time I went to my lockup actually and started swapping things around, getting rid of a few things, looking at some of the prized possessions that I've got in my house and deciding those need to be preserved now and not the others, and selling those off, a little bit like what Mainmeister's doing. And with that, guys, thank you so much for watching. You know you're all my friends. And I hope you stay around to watch next week. I hope you like the topic this week. And we'll see you very shortly. My salute to you all, and good night. Bye-bye.